Blake Lively is back in court, and honestly, the audacity is kind of impressive. So here's where we are right now. The whole Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively situation. Technically, it's Blake Lively versus Wayfarer Studios, but everyone knows this is really about Baldoni and those accusations she made against him. So the lawsuit happened, the judge threw out 10 of her 13 claims, and then they settled. They settled before it ever went to trial, before any jury ever looked at the evidence, before anyone had to actually prove anything in a courtroom. Done. Over. Settled. And Blake walked away without a single dollar. Now here's where it gets interesting, because apparently Blake Lively does not think it's over. She is now back in front of a judge, seeking damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, money after settling. And the legal community is genuinely scratching its head over this one, because how do you settle a case, which by definition means you agreed to end it without a trial, and then turn around and request the judge to award you damages for claims that were never actually decided? Like, you basically said, you know what? Let's not run the race, and now you're asking for the trophy. And everyone's going, we didn't even race. We have no idea who would have won. And Blake's over there going, yeah, but it was going to be me. So the judge gave both sides until 5 p.m. Sunday to submit a 2-page brief, single space, 12-point font, 2 pages. That was the assignment. And Blake Lively's team turned in something that by multiple accounts reads like a manifesto. Like, they took the concept of 2 pages as more of a suggestion. The formatting alone is apparently something else. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's team came in with actual white space on the page, normal bold text, readable arguments, 2 very different energies walking into that courtroom. And here's the actual legal argument Blake's side is making. Her team is citing a case called Jackpocket versus Lotto Matrix, trying to build this procedural bridge from a footnote in that ruling to argue she should be entitled to damages here. Basically saying there's a precedent that allows the judge to still rule on damages even after a settlement. The problem is, this is a pretty unique situation, and federal judges in New York don't typically love when you come to them with a creative reading of a footnote from a case that isn't exactly a mirror image of yours. Baldoni's team fired back with something pretty straightforward. They said since Blake has dismissed her claims and given up her right to appeal, there is simply no mechanism for her to fulfill the burden required for punitive or treble damages. And they're not wrong. Punitive damages exist to punish, but punishing someone requires first proving they did something wrong. And that proof only comes from a trial. There was no trial. Blake chose no trial, so asking for punitive damages now is legally speaking a significant stretch. Then the judge dropped something that stopped everyone in their tracks. He mentioned that this entire matter might actually be a California issue, meaning the court in New York might not even be the appropriate place to resolve this. And people immediately started asking, does that mean Blake would have to take this to California? Does that mean starting over? Does that mean an entirely new round of litigation? And look, if you know anything about Blake Lively's approach here, a California trial is not what she's looking for. Nobody on her team wants to go back to square one in a different state and actually litigate these claims from the beginning. Brian Friedman, who is Baldoni's attorney, walked out of the courthouse and got caught by cameras almost immediately. And he was composed, very composed. Someone asked him if this could go to a jury trial or a bench trial. And he basically said he'd be surprised, but he'd wait and see what the judge determines. He said, Judge Lyman is sharper than anyone standing in front of him right now, which is the classic lawyer move of complimenting the judge while also suggesting your case is solid, smart. Someone also pointed out that the judge himself indicated Blake Lively could conclude this right now. Friedman said he believed that was true from the very beginning. And here's the thing that a legal commentator named Not Actually Golden raised, and she actually makes a really clear argument. She said, to award someone punitive damages, you need a high burden of proof. That burden can only be established at trial. There was no trial. Therefore, the judge cannot grant punitive damages. It's not complicated. It's actually pretty difficult to argue against. Where it gets murky is the attorney's fees question, because that operates under slightly different standards, and Blake's team leaned into that more than the damages argument. Wayfair's legal team leaned harder on the damages issue and didn't invest as much time on fees, which might come back to affect them depending on how the judge rules. There was also some live coverage from inside the courtroom. And apparently during the rebuttal portion, Blake's side argued that the legislation they're relying on was specifically designed to protect sexual harassment plaintiffs and that the legislature couldn't have intended for those protections to simply disappear upon settlement. The judge's response? He said he wasn't sure how to make that statute function except as a counterclaim. That's not exactly the reaction you're hoping for when you're defending your legal theory in real time to the person deciding your case. So, Right now, nobody knows what Judge Lyman is going to do. Not Blake's team, not Baldoni's team, not Brian Friedman, who literally just walked out of the building. The ruling hasn't arrived yet, and everyone, including the people who were inside that courtroom, are essentially waiting to find out how this concludes. What makes this whole thing so fascinating is the position Blake Lively placed herself in by settling in the first place. Because when that settlement was announced, the reaction was not what her team probably anticipated. People weren't applauding her for being courageous or for standing up for victims. The general response was more like, "Wait, that's it? You spent months making this the biggest story in Hollywood. You gave that massive press tour. You got on every platform available to you and made this about sisterhood and safety and protecting women in the industry. And then you settled quietly without a single dollar changing hands and without Baldoni ever being found guilty of anything in a courtroom. That's a tough sell. And Blake's PR team clearly recognized it too, because the narrative shifted almost immediately after the settlement was announced. Suddenly, the framing became less about victory and more about moving forward, about protecting her peace, about not wanting to drag her family through a trial, which, fair enough, those are genuine considerations. But it didn't connect the way they wanted it to, because people remembered the energy from the beginning. The way Blake came out forcefully, the detail in those initial filings, the way she named names and described specific incidents and made it feel like she had evidence for everything. And then it just stopped. 10 of 13 claims were already dismissed before the settlement even happened. The judge had already examined what Blake's team presented and said, "No, these don't hold up." And then rather than fight for the 3 that were still standing, she settled. So now returning to court, asking for damages, feels to a lot of people like trying to rewrite the conclusion after the credits already rolled. It's like she wants the record to reflect she won something, and right now the record doesn't show that. Baldoni's side has been fairly consistent throughout all of this. His team argued from the beginning that the whole PR operation against him was coordinated and calculated, that there was a deliberate effort to destroy his reputation before he even had a chance to respond publicly. And his lawsuit against Blake and Ryan Reynolds reflected that. He's been carrying a damaged public image for months while this played out. And the settlement didn't resolve that for him either. No jury ever said he was innocent. No judge ever ruled in his favor. It just ended, which means both of them are walking away from this without the definitive outcome either of them probably wanted. And that's kind of the uncomfortable reality of high-profile lawsuits that settle. Nobody gets the clean narrative. Blake doesn't get to say she won. Baldoni doesn't get to say he was vindicated. The public doesn't get the complete story because it never came out in a courtroom. And now Blake is back in front of a judge, trying to extract something out of this that gives her case some kind of significance, some kind of conclusion that feels like justice rather than just a quiet exit. The attorney's fees argument is actually the more compelling one legally because it doesn't require the same burden of proof that punitive damages do. If Blake's team can persuade the judge that she was the prevailing party in some technical sense, even after settling, there's a possibility she walks away with her legal bills covered. That would be something. Not a major public victory, but something she could reference, something her team could work with. And given how costly this litigation has been, we're probably talking about a figure that isn't small. Baldoni's team understands this too, which is why they were a little brief on the fees argument in their 2-pager. They concentrated on damages because that's the bigger theoretical exposure and the easier legal win for them. But if the judge decides the fees question is still unresolved and starts examining that, Wayfarer's side might wish they had devoted more words to it. The inner city press was posting from inside the courtroom and captured some of the exchanges in real time. The rebuttal was apparently quite pointed. Blake's legal team attempted to make the argument that the statute they're relying on was written with a specific intention to protect people in exactly the situation Blake describes, and that allowing that protection to vanish just because someone settled would undermine the entire purpose of the law. It's not an unreasonable argument. It's actually a somewhat compelling one. The problem is sympathy doesn't always translate to legal authority, and the judge appears skeptical. When a judge says he doesn't know how to make a statute function except as a counterclaim, that's him signaling your reading of the law has a problem. Now, the California question is the one that nobody really wants to confront, because if Judge Lyman concludes this is actually a matter for California courts, the whole thing potentially restarts in a different jurisdiction. New filings, new arguments, new timeline. And if you thought Blake Lively wanted to avoid a full trial in New York, consider how her team feels about refiling in California and going through all of this again. That outcome would benefit nobody. It would cost both sides more money, more time, more media attention they've both been trying to manage carefully. So, there's a reasonable chance both legal teams are quietly hoping the judge simply rules on the merits right here in New York and lets everyone move forward. But Judge Lyman is going to do what Judge Lyman is going to do. And from everything reported out of that courtroom, he's not someone who gets pressured by the framing of either side. He's been direct. He's asked tough questions, and he flagged the California issue himself, which indicates he's already thinking several steps beyond what both legal teams presented to him. So, where does this all leave Blake Lively right now? Honestly, in a complicated position because the public perception side of this has not unfolded the way she planned. And the legal side is now genuinely uncertain. She came into this whole situation with significant goodwill. She had people rallying behind her. She had the entertainment press largely supporting her. She had women in the industry speaking up in her defense, and somewhere along the way, that momentum shifted. Not completely, not all at once, but enough that the settlement landed with a thud instead of a cheer. And look, settling a lawsuit is not admitting defeat. Attorneys will tell you that all day long. People settle for all kinds of reasons, avoiding the unpredictability of a jury, shielding family members from having to testify, preserving time and money. Those are legitimate motivations. But Blake didn't just file a quiet lawsuit. She made this very public, very loud, very personal. She connected it to bigger conversations about power and safety in Hollywood. So when it concluded the way it did, without a trial, without a verdict, without Baldoni being found responsible for anything, the people who were watching closely felt the distance between what was promised and what was delivered. And now requesting damages after the fact is essentially asking the judge to provide her something the legal process never actually produced. Brian Friedman, walking out of that courthouse, calm and measured, communicated everything about where Baldoni's team believes this is heading. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't avoiding questions. He said he'd be surprised if this proceeded to trial. He praised the judge. He said it would be impossible to determine the dollar amount being discussed because even the paperwork doesn't make it transparent. That final point is actually significant because if Blake's own filings don't establish a clear figure, that's going to make it very challenging for a judge to award anything specific, even if he wanted to. The legal commentators, who have been following this carefully, seem to arrive in roughly the same place. Punitive damages after a settlement where no liability was ever established is a very difficult ask. Attorneys' fees are more achievable, but not guaranteed. And the California question hanging over everything makes the entire ruling feel like it could move in an unexpected direction. Nobody is giving Blake Lively strong odds here, and her own team's decision to submit what sounded like an oversized manifesto when the judge requested 2 clean pages suggests either confidence or desperation. And from the outside, it's difficult to determine which one. What's notable is that Justin Baldoni has largely remained quiet through all of this public phase. His legal team has been doing the communicating. His attorney is the one walking out of courthouses in baby blue suits delivering measured statements. Baldoni himself has not been out here making declarations or doing press. And in a strange way, that restraint has worked in his favor, perception-wise, because the person who made the most noise is now the one whose case concluded without a verdict. And the person who stayed composed is the one whose legal team appears relatively settled heading into the judge's ruling. That doesn't mean Baldoni is without his own complications. His reputation took a serious hit the moment those initial filings from Blake's team went public. The details that emerged, the descriptions of conduct on set, the allegations surrounding the PR operation his team allegedly ran against her, those things entered the public record and remained there. A settlement doesn't eliminate that. No ruling from Judge Lyman eliminates that. Those allegations exist, and people read them in formed judgments. So even if Baldoni walks away from this courtroom without paying $1, he's still navigating the consequences of everything that was said about him publicly over the past several months. We will absolutely keep you informed the moment that ruling arrives. Stay with us.